Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm so sorry about last week. As you can tell, I'm still trying to get over the flu that my niece and nephew gave me. I am of firm belief that they are pigeons of society. Toddlers are. Um, uh, anyway, I love them dearly, but hanging out with 2.5-year-olds at this time of the year is probably not a good idea. So, welcome back to week 2, going into week 3. What I'm going to do tonight is give you a brief check-in. You'll find that all the videos I do, I'll start it out with a check-in, and then we will go into the lecture, or I'll discuss some of the things you're talking about in the discussion boards. I like to be able to have you see me because I think it helps. There's a real person, and you're putting a face with the voice and all of that good stuff. And I welcome your comments after I post the video, if you have any questions afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of myself right now, not literally, figuratively. And let's go through and do a real quick check-in of week 1. Couple of things that came up in the forums. The question and answer forum was these 4 bullet points. I'd like to talk a little bit about each one of them for a second. So someone asked about in-person meetings, if they were required. They are not, and I will leave it up to your groups as to whether or not you want to meet in person. I am more than happy to meet you on campus on Tuesday nights during my office hours. That's from 5 to 5:50 in room C204, or we could meet over at the library if you like. I'm also available on the weekends. So if you're stuck with something and you're on campus and there's a group of you and you want to get together and talk for a little bit, I'm happy to drive to Alameda and do that. But as far as the course goes, there's no planned in-person meetings. So another question that came up was about the time to post responses and homework. I noticed last intersession that I taught, Moodle, I think, works on either Central Time or Eastern Standard Time, which makes it problematic to have a deadline on Moodle. So what I decided to do this time around is leave it open. If you are doing the responses and the homework weekly, you're checking in, I can tell how often you're online. If you're doing all of those things, don't worry about it. Just get the work done as you can, and you'll be fine. That's not to say that you can wait until the last week of the course to finish everything. You need to keep up with it. But as far as hard and fast deadlines, I'd like to try to stay away from that, because it might be that we get into a chapter, or not a chapter, but an area of discovery, and we spend a week or 2 on it, discussing it online. Because social problems are not simple. They're very, very complicated, and there's no real one solution. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. So I want to give us the time to explore what you're interested in, and really give you the experience of defining a social problem for yourself or for your group, and then trying to work through a possible solution. Okay, so no real hard and fast deadlines for the next couple weeks, but let's just try to stay on top of everything. All right, so I would say as long as you get everything in by Sunday night, you're fine. If you run a little late one week, that's okay. As long as it's not you're doing 4 weeks of work in the 8th week, and that just isn't going to happen. Okay, and I'll post up, what I think is a reasonable deadline for you to have things done. The week 2 and 3 assignments did not get posted because, as you can tell from my voice, I haven't had a voice. And I really wanted to make sure that I gave you a lecture and a way to speak to you about your work prior to putting up the next week's assignments. So we'll give you some extra time. As I said before, I had built in this time for the syllabus just in case things happen. And then finally, Someone asked about my own personal interests when it comes to social problems, and my background in research comes from a place of studying identity formation amongst the gay and lesbian community. And as an undergrad, and the Mormon community and feminism. And another part of my graduate work was identity formation in higher education. And so I am extremely interested in how the education system is designed to keep certain individuals out. I find that to be extremely problematic because I think education is not just a pathway to a higher salary. I think that if we go back to the 1920s, the 1930s, with the Enlightenment period, if you will, of American society and democracy, I would defer to John Dewey and Alexander Meiklejohn, who believed that an educated population is necessary for a functioning democracy. And I think we're moving further and further away from that as a society, and it's my goal to kind of start bringing us back to center. So those are two areas that I'm interested in. Another one that I've done some work with is income inequality and housing inequality. I think that with gentrification, the housing market, and the like, income inequality is a huge social problem that we need to re-examine and redefine and see exactly what we're going to do about this. Because our social class not only impacts the amount of money that we make, but it also has a huge role in determining our children's life outcomes and our grandchildren's life outcomes. So those are just a couple of things that I'm interested in, and as I was reading through your discussion posts, you all have some really interesting stuff that you're talking about. And and then finally, the other one, I guess, that I'm just really starting to get into now is the militarization of the police force in the United States. So that's a new area of interest for me that I'm hoping to share with you as time goes on. So let's get into the actual meat and potatoes part of tonight's lecture. And I just wanted to give you a quick refresher from the Intro to Sociology class if you haven't taken it or it's been a while. Because what you learn in Sociology 1 is essential to being able to explore social problems from a sociological perspective, right? So C. Wright Mills was the cat that came up with the sociological imagination. That was his term. He was back in the 50s. One of my favorite sociologists. And it was really this idea that we could suspend our life experience and look at the experience of ourselves or others through the social forces that shape that experience. So we would stop, or we wouldn't say to someone, it's your fault that you're in the position that you're in, living in poverty. But let's look at how government policy and education and income inequality and inequality in the criminal justice system all play into this culture of poverty, if you will. Social location is something, it's how we situate a group of individuals or an individual in society at a given period of time. So we look at what are the policies in play, what are the cultural norms, beliefs, and behaviors of that group and society at large. What are some of the historical things going on, and where is that person or people located within that intersection? So it's kind of like a web, and we're looking at it. If we look at the web from up top, we're looking at the very middle. That would be the person, right? And then you've got all these other factors that are determining what's going on for this person. the social location is just simply what's going on and where that person is at a given period of time. So we're not talking a physical location necessarily. We're talking a social location. Social theory is my other favoriteest thing in the world because it helps us to kind of frame what we're looking at. We can say that it's common sense that everybody should be created equal, but if we look at inequality in the world through different social theories, it helps us to explain why those things persist in society. So the big four would be conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, functionalism, and feminism. And if you took Sociology 1 with me, we probably mentioned critical race theory, and hopefully in this class we'll talk a little bit about postmodernism. And I'm going to ask you to pick a theory or theories that you think help to explore the nuances in the social problem or problems that your group decides they want to explore throughout the semester, okay? We got plenty of time to do this. I know everybody freaking out, okay? I'm here with you 100%. You're going to do great. This is going to be a fun class, I promise. And it's because of there's so many different theories, and there's so many different theorists, and there's so many different social problems. If I were to give you a book and tell you to read it and say, okay, here you go, guys, read this, and I'll give you a quiz or a test on it, well, that's great. All right, you get an A, whatever. But I am an applied sociologist. I believe that you name it, you claim it, and then you change it. So that's what the mantra of this class is all about, right? Now, in order for us to do that, and to do it in a sustainable way, meaning that something that is going to have a long-lasting impact and is going to be able to change with the times, we have to assure that as sociologists, we get rid of ethnocentrism in our work. Ethnocentrism is this, it's a human quality. It's what we do, right? When we look at a situation that is very familiar to us, we tend to put our own personal experiences in that situation, and we view them from a very biased lens. Just like if we were to look at another situation in a different society that is very foreign to us, and we make value judgments on that based on our own cultural standards and beliefs and norms, that's not going to do us any good. It's not going to tell us what we need to know as sociologists. So think of ethnocentrism as placing a value on something, saying whether it's good or it's bad, it's positive or it's negative, and we're going to try to stay away from that as much as we can, unless we have data and evidence to support what we're saying. That will make sense later on in the course, I promise, okay? So, with that said, let's go now into social problems. And we need to talk about how we define social problems in the discipline. So when we look at something, let's say poverty, we need to recognize that there's two sides to poverty. There's an objective side and there's a subjective side. And the objective side is something measurable. So we could look at income levels. We could look at the number of individuals within each racial category, perhaps, that fall into socioeconomic classes. That's something we can measure, right? The subjective piece of this comes when we find out how people feel about people who live in poverty. What do people, who are the people that people think live in poverty? When I teach my introductory class, I think a lot of students are stunned to find out that, those living in poverty that are single mothers on welfare tend to be white women, and this goes against a stereotype, I think, that's based in public opinion of the welfare mother, who is a woman of color with 4 different baby daddies and things like that. That's public opinion. We want to find out what the public opinion is, and then how is it actually not proven with the measurables, right? We can do this with any social problem, right? So if we talk about medicinal marijuana, another social problem, if you will, we could take a look at the efficacy. You know, how many people have medicinal marijuana cards in Northern California that use that card for recreational purposes as opposed for medicinal purposes? Do those numbers then show public opinion when it comes to whether the public approves of medicinal marijuana use in Northern California, right? Do this with anything, okay? This is the way, when you hear these studies that are done about, people believe that California is going down the tubes. Well, that's public opinion, right? And we may find that, in fact, California is starting to come back economically. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm making this up right now. But the important thing when we define a social problem is to make sure that we take both of those pieces, the objective and the subjective, into consideration. The second characteristic is that social problems are dynamic. If we look at, abortion, for instance, we'll find that over time, public opinion changes due to a variety of different social factors, legislation, religiosity, traditional family values, right? All this stuff kind of comes into play, but it doesn't stay stagnant. If racial issues weren't a dynamic social problem, racial conflict wasn't dynamic and changed, we'd be able to come up with a solution and bam, everything would be good to go, allegedly, right? But the fact of the matter is that when we talk about racial inequality, it's a very dynamic and fluid process. So we may make strides economically in some areas, but then we start to see incarceration rates increase, right? So we have to look at the big picture. We can't allow ourselves to get, stuck in one place or one time. Also, social problems are relative, meaning that there's always usually somebody that's benefiting from a social problem, and those people are usually the people in power. So when we talk about wealth inequality, well, not everybody's poor, right? Some people are making a killing right now. Some people's wealth is increasing exponentially. So for them, that's not a social problem, right? But for those individuals that are barely scraping by, that's a huge problem, isn't it? So we have to remember that it's who are we talking about and what part are we coming at it from? Okay, which place are we coming at it from? Also, there's always going to be competing views. A social problem is never something that everybody agrees on. Gay marriage is a great example of that. Some people believe that gay marriage is a right. Other people believe that gay marriage is an affront and an attack on traditional marriage, right? That's what makes it a social problem to study, the gay marriage problem. We don't have a consensus. There's some friction. It's causing concern in different parts of the country, and the U.S. Supreme Court is actually going to be starting to talk about this. So there's competing views. People are not agreeing on what's going on within the context of that social issue. So There's 4 stages of evolution that we look at when we try to trace back and determine where social problems started and how it evolved into being this big or this thing that we're talking about now. So first off comes emergence. You start to see a phenomenon occur in society, and it might be at a very small level. It's at a micro level maybe, but there's a trend, right? People are starting to notice something changing in society. So when that begins to happen, we have to define what that change is. What are we starting to see, right? How is this thing working in society? What are we going to call it? As soon as we name it, right, then we go into a leadership phase where you get individuals who decide to take a specific stance on this newly discovered social problem or social issue, right? So you may have a pro side and a con side, okay? And let's use abortion for example. You may, before medical procedures made abortion or terminating a pregnancy a viable option for most women, you may not have seen it in society because it was hidden. But once medical technology came of age and these things could be done in a doctor's office or a hospital setting, people started to notice it a bit more. So we had to define this. What is this? Well, this is, life. We're talking about, the termination of a life, for instance, Well, when that happened, you had 2 camps. You had people that said, you know what, it's okay to do this. It's a woman's choice. Others saying, no, it's not okay, right? And those can be based on social factors such as religion, ethics, morals, all of that good stuff, okay? After leadership emerges, you begin to see social organizations. The society begins, or people within a society or group begin to organize around these leaders. Oh, I agree with you. I think abortion should be wrong. Or, I believe it's a woman's right to choose. Okay? So then what happens is after you kind of have this separation and you start to see it manifesting as a movement, you move on to stage 2. And once again, the debate occurs publicly. It may go through a defining period where we redefine what the terms life is, right, or was. You may define what the term abortion means. You may find that the different organizations use different words to describe something very similar. They will maybe empower themselves through language. And then there's a response. You get this response from the society. This is where the legislative folks usually come in, either state, local, federal government, or social institutions such as education. May say, well, we're going to talk about sex education. We're going to talk about abstinence instead of talking about the termination of a pregnancy. So you start to see all these different social institutions weighing in. Next comes legislative action. So if I live in a very conservative community, chances are, my community is not going to support a Planned Parenthood branch, right, in my community. So there may be legislative laws, local laws that says that you can't be here, right? Or we're not going to give out condoms to schools. We're going to teach abstinence, right, instead of safe sex. While in another community, they may say, oh, well, you know what? we know abstinence doesn't work, so we're going to teach safe sex. And they may institute that as a legislative piece. And then as this debate grows, you start to see statewide initiatives, and then maybe regional or national initiatives. But remember, a strong social value and a strong social norm tend to become laws because the majority of the individuals in that group believe that a behavior should be regulated in a certain way. Now, when that legislative action starts to take hold, we move into stage 3, which is an official response, right? So now you get politicians, you get school board members, you get parents, you get these social institutions, the leaders of these social institutions, to weigh in on one side or the other, right? So now they've seen, let's say the schools say, you know what, there is a problem with teenage pregnancy in our community, abstinence isn't working, we are going to then go against the majority of the community, and we're going to implement a safe sex program in our schools, giving out condoms or whatever it is. That might be one official response. Well, then you get reactions, right? You get the people that are like, yay, this is going to be great, teen pregnancy rates are going to decrease. And then you also get the other side that wanted abstinence, right? And they're saying, no, this is not right. Sex before marriage is wrong, or whatever their argument is, okay? They're usually very heated. A lot of times these reactions aren't based in fact. They're based in common sense, which is something that we really don't, we want to stay away from as sociologists. We want to look at the reactions. We want to see what are those social forces. What is it that is creating these camps, okay? So when that reaction, that social reaction occurs, and that dialogue takes place, you might see individuals in the organizations and the leadership start to shift definitions. This is a recursive process. This doesn't just end with one of these stages. Because let's look at the pro-life, pro-choice debate. That's been going on since the 1950s, right? And we constantly are doing this. We're constantly defining and redefining socially what our stance is as a group and what these different camps believe in. Or the definition may stay the same. So once that starts to occur, all of this social discourse takes place. You have social reaction. People that didn't really have a stake in it before feel like now they do have a stake. So it becomes a social problem because now it's dividing not just those organizations or those leaders, but it's dividing society as a whole. You either fall on one side or the other. And people have very strong opinions based on their own social location and their own experiences. When that begins to happen, we move to stage 4, which is the institutional reaction. Okay, you know what? We're going to put a federal law in place that protects clinics, Planned Parenthood clinics. Okay, we're going to institute a public, a national policy in our public schools that condoms will be accessible to students, and we will fund sex ed classes, right? And once again, I'm just using this as an example, okay? So the institutional reaction comes from the social institution of education or the federal government or a combination, right? So then, once that reaction gets out there and people start messing with it and start kind of debating it again, the definitions can change again. How we're defining this as a social problem. Well, before it was this idea of, everybody has a right to live, right? Now it's a morality question. It became a morality question. Now it's a question of personal rights. You know, I don't have control over what my child learns in school. You know, I don't want my child exposed to this. And now it's a personal liberties issue, right? You get more social reaction. And as that occurs, you know, as we get deeper and deeper into these stages, we find that people start to develop alternative strategies. And they usually fall in three different categories. You have ultra-conservatives or conservatives. Those that believe that the way things are the way things should stay, right? Or they're taking a very conservative approach to the problem. You have moderates that are somewhere in between. They can see both sides of the argument, and they tend to be very much also be neutral, maybe, right? They're not as committed as a conservative or a radical would be. Finally, you have the radical stage, and those are the individuals that are take no prisoners, ready to go. We need social change now, and we'll go to any measure, any length to make sure that that happens. Sometimes at the with the other side paying the price. You know, there's this take no prisoners attitude amongst many radicals because they believe what they have to say and what they think is the way everyone should think, right? And they're willing to go to extreme lengths to make sure that people understand that. So, what is our job in all of this? Well, you know, it's to use a scientific method, you know, to use research, to research or to discover these problems, to tear them apart, to try to take the bias and the emotion out of it, right? We're going to measure the objective conditions, those things that we can count, and we're going to measure all the concerns. We're going to look at those different camps, you know, those different organizations, those different ways of thinking. And we're going to see where people fall. You know, where do most people fall on this debate? Is it that most people are moderate, or do we have a lot of people falling on the conservative end or the radical end, right? So we want to get a gauge as to where the majority of people are situated at that time. Next, we want to look at the situation through the lens of that sociological imagination, right? And that's where the theory comes through. What function, if we're using functionalism, what function is this problem or this action or activity? What is the function of that? What is the function of the discourse? What is the function of the dysfunction, right? Why are these things happening from a sociological place? Next, if we're good, right, and we're really committed to something and we're trying to stay neutral, we might offer potential interventions. We might say, you know, this is the way we see wealth inequality in the United States. How do you redistribute that wealth? Well, maybe you can't. That's a question for an economic person, right? But maybe giving the voice to people in poverty by, you know, putting together community groups and empowering communities to pool resources. Maybe that's one way to do it, you know, to pool resources to make our communities better, to stop gentrification from occurring. You know, that might be a potential intervention. It would all depend on the situation and what we were studying and where we were studying it, right? Because we've got to take the geography into account as well. And then finally, this is what I tend to do, is I like to study and evaluate social policy because that's the legislative piece, right? That's what tells us what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do within the system. And if just a minute number of people are developing social policies. I'm interested to see who those social policies are really helping. Are they helping the person who is living paycheck to paycheck, or are they helping the 1%, quote unquote, the people who don't really need the help, right? So that's really, in a nutshell, what a sociologist would do when examining a social problem. So that's it for that part of the lecture. I am going to come back in just a bit and go on to the next lecture. But I hope you found this helpful in starting to define what you might be interested in as we continue this journey. So talk to you soon, and I hope you enjoyed, or at least learned something.